Hello, my name is Ted Piotrowicz. I'm a veteran of United States Naval Service. I served on active duty from 1956 to 1960. I was attached to and flew with the BAW-11 Squadron based at North Island Naval Air Station, Coronado, California. I would like to take you back to a period of time in October of 1958. At that time, I was deployed on the U.S.S. Lexington in the South China Sea on patrol, making a show of strength and peace in that vicinity of the Pacific. Uh, at that time, we were south of what we used to refer to as Red China. Remember, this is 1958, and we had Red China, meaning a Chinese mainland now because it was just taken over by the communists. And then there was nationalist China, and that was basically housed on the island of Formosa, today known as Taiwan. Chiang Kai-shek was the head of the nationalist Chinese people, and he was exiled to Formosa, kicked off the mainland of China. Uh, One evening, as we were just starting to watch the movie aboard ship, it was abruptly stopped, and we were told, all flight personnel report to your ready rooms. I proceeded to go to my ready room, and opening the hatchway, looked in and saw on the far wall a map of China, Red China. To my surprise, the naval intelligence officers were preparing to brief us on a target in the coastline of Red China. It was an air base at Nantai, and we were scheduled to attack that air base, in effect attack and begin a war with China the following morning. We were scheduled for a 0600 launch, and we went through the briefing of anti-aircraft placement, fighter interception, weather potential, and the various sundry escape routes, etc., and was advised that this was a conventional weapons attack that would destroy the air base. We had within our vicinity two other carriers, the Midway and the Bonhomme Richard, affectionately known among Navy men as the Bonnie Dick. And they were on station in our vicinity, and presumably they were also instructed to attack China, along with Air Force B-52s on the island of Guam, which is about 1,000 miles south, as well as Air Force units in Japan. So it would have been a very large attack, conventional weapons as such. So we proceeded to go through the briefing, and we were finally dismissed to come back at the morning briefing at 0430 for updates, and I proceeded to go back to my quarters, and in doing so I take a shortcut through the hangar deck. The hangar deck is below the main flight deck, and it is covered by sliding overhead doors, and most things which are done secretly or confidentially are done in the hangar deck because we are constantly tailed by Russian submarines that were interested in our activities off the China coast. I proceeded to go through the hangar deck and noticed we had 7 aircraft being loaded with nuclear weapons. And I was struck by that because we just came back from a briefing which we were told this was a conventional weapons, 2,000-pound bombs, rockets, etc., and as opposed to nuclear. So I asked one of the ordnance officers what was going on with the loading of the nuclear weapons. He looked at me rather sarcastically and says, you must be Polish because we're loading these weapons because Russia, which was a very close ally in 1958 of Red China, would counterattack in order to defend China, and they expected a nuclear attack on the naval forces in the South China Sea. So we would launch our nuclear forces to make attacks on the mainland of China before we were wiped out. So I was really surprised by this, and took a deep breath and gently patted one of the nuclear weapons that was hung on an FJ Fury jet, and proceeded to my quarters to get a night's sleep. The following morning, I was up early and headed to the ready room for the final briefing, and there we proceeded to get last-minute details of weather and any aircraft positions as it might relate to us in our direction of attack. And we normally would get instructions to man our aircraft 30 minutes before launch via a visual teletype. Remember, we're talking 1958 technology. 1958 was a little different than today. And I wanted to add that we had U-2s flying over China, much to the frustration of the Chinese, because they did not have the aircraft or the aircraft technology to shoot them down. They were coming out of Russia and were making observation flights over China and reporting back. But as we went through the briefing that morning of the attack, we finished and waited for the teletype to come out with the message, man your aircraft. Well, 30 minutes before launch arrived, no message. 20 minutes before launch arrived, no message. We were getting a little concerned as to what was going on. Another 10 minutes later, the teletype came to life and issued, hold the launch message. So we held off on manning the aircraft. 30 minutes later, we got another teletype message which said, postpone the launch. So we thought something really strange has happened. Subsequent to my being retired from active duty in 1960, Eisenhower, who was president obviously in 1958, finished out his term and then proceeded immediately to work on his memoirs. And about 18 months later, finished them and published them. Since I had that experience in 1958 at the South China Sea, I was anxious to read those memoirs to see what, if anything, he had written about Quemoy and Matsu. Those were the two islands which were causing grief with the Red Chinese. They claimed ownership, but Chiang Kai-shek had his people still on those islands. Those two islands were roughly 1.5 miles to 3 miles off the coast of Red China, and Red China was bombarding those islands suddenly. And our U-2s were flying over and discovered that air squadrons were being sent to coastal air stations, as well as land troops being moved to points of embarkation at the coast. And then the U-2s discovered there were troop ships coming from the north, presumably to pick up those troops. And with the squadrons being deployed to the coastal air stations, Eisenhower concluded that they were going to attack Formosa and Chiang Kai-shek. Eisenhower said, we can't allow that. We have a treaty with Chiang Kai-shek to protect them. What should we do? In what I consider to be total genius, Eisenhower and his Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, sent the code to attack China. In a code, Eisenhower felt confident that Red Chinese could break, give China an opportunity to respond to that attack threat. And time went by, and remember now, we were sitting in the ready room waiting for man-your aircraft at that time. Anyway, China did break the code and had to make a move. They did not want to go to war with us at that time, so they did the right thing. They turned the troop ships 180 degrees to show Eisenhower and the U-2s that they did not want a conflict or war. And if you think about that for a minute, that is how close we came to a nuclear war in 1958. And it was exciting. I never knew the details until Eisenhower's memoirs were published. I found it absolutely fascinating. I salute Dwight Eisenhower for the genius in doing it the way he did it and having the code broken by the Chinese to make a reaction so that we could anticipate the right thing to do. That was excitement. We returned home safely, no war. We stayed on alert, loaded our aircraft for 30 more days till the threat was over. Thank you.